Hey there, guys. Welcome to the Schiz and Giggles podcast. My name is Kody Green. I live with schizophrenia.
And I'm Kit Wallis, and I live with schizoaffective disorder.
And we are super excited to be doing this. We've been talking about this for a couple weeks now, and we really wanted to try to help create a podcast for people living on the schizophrenia spectrum because both of us have been at a point now as advocates where we wanted to try to reach people who are in the same place in their journey that we were years ago in our own. And since we're both in a great place as advocates, I reached out to Kit and asked if she'd be willing to be a part of this podcast and just have some conversations about our lives, how we got started in advocacy. And so this first episode is really about us. This is going to be about who we are, how we got to this point, and why we decided to do this podcast. And so I'm going to let Kit get started here. And Kit, I just want to ask you, to talk a little bit about your diagnosis, how you got diagnosed, and what that process looked like for you, and how your care team was a part of that, or how the people in your lives helped you through that process.
So I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder way after I started experiencing symptoms of mental illness. My earliest symptoms go back to elementary school, but I didn't start experiencing what would become my actual mental health diagnosis until I was 14 years old. And I struggled for many years before being able to get help for a wide variety of reasons. But when I was 18, I landed myself in a psychiatrist's office, and he diagnosed me with my first mood disorder, cyclothymia. Now, you might be thinking, she's got schizoaffective disorder. There's psychosis with that. What's going on with that? And really, while I started hearing voices when I was 14, I did not realize that they were hallucinations. I thought I was just thinking creatively or thinking in conversation. And so I went through a large part of my life not realizing that I was psychotic like all the time because I was hallucinating 24/7. But my voices were kind, they didn't cause me distress. So I didn't really view them as an issue. And so when I got my mood disorder diagnosis, I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. But unfortunately, even though that was being treated, I was still getting worse over time. And so as time passed, in college, I was diagnosed with bipolar 2. After college, I had a psychotic break and was diagnosed with bipolar 1 with psychotic features. And then eventually, I just sat down with my doctor and told him that the voices I heard all the time. And he said, oh, that makes you schizoaffective instead of bipolar. And we'll get into exactly why that's a thing in the future. But for now, that's kind of where I was and what happened to me. And so it was a long process because, once again, I got my symptoms that would later become my schizoaffective disorder started when I was 14, but I didn't get help until I was 18. And then it wasn't until 2020 that I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. So I've only been diagnosed with my actual disorder for 5 years. Late at the end of this year, it'll be 5 years. So, yeah.
As we bring on other guests living with schizophrenia, I know our viewers are going to hear this a lot. Most people go years without a proper diagnosis. I will say so, and I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about my story, but just to play off of what Kit just said. My mother has schizoaffective, also was originally diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So the next episode we're going to do is about the difference between schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. And I know Kit has a ton to say about this, but I also was a caregiver for someone with schizoaffective. So I'm really excited to have that conversation. But as for me and my journey, my experience with schizophrenia didn't actually start with my own diagnosis. It started with my mom's. When I was a preteen, my mom started having auditory and visual hallucinations. She also was struggling with bipolar, the mood disorder side of things. And we live in a very small rural area, so we didn't have a lot of answers or resources to what was going on with her. Unfortunately for her, it took almost a decade just before I was going to go off to college for her to get a proper diagnosis. So the really frustrating part about that was we didn't have anyone to turn to. We didn't have anyone who understood what was going on. And that's why she went so long without getting the help she needed. And unfortunately, if you go a very long time without treatment or medication, it can lead to severe cognitive issues, which my mom does suffer from because of her late diagnosis. So after she got her diagnosis, it was about the time that I was supposed to be heading off to college. I had been basically a full-time caregiver for her, so I never expected to go to college. And I was really fortunate that she was doing better and she had my little brother and little sister to look after her. And so I went to my first year of college, and that's where I started experiencing my psychotic symptoms. I started having auditory and visual hallucinations, delusions, and paranoid thoughts. And the scariest part for me was looking back. It's really terrifying that I had all of this information about schizophrenia. I was a caregiver for someone with schizophrenia. I knew what it looked like. I knew how it affected someone. But when my symptoms started, I was unable to tell that that's what was going on with me. And so that led to me falling into addiction as a way to try to cope with what I was going through. I didn't reach out. I didn't get the help I needed. I didn't think anything was wrong with me. Same as Kit. I had no knowledge that what I was experiencing was schizophrenia, and I didn't really register it as a bad thing. I actually thought I was gaining the ability to hear the thoughts of people around me. And so I spent years struggling with addiction. I started having symptoms at 18. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 21 after years of addiction and getting out of jail. So that's what led to me starting advocacy, finding peer support, finding treatment and medication, and eventually meeting Kit here. And so I'm really excited to get into. I want to ask you more about how you went from, being a person diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder to your advocacy, because I met you officially last year at the Healthy Voices conference, and so I want to hear more about that transition for you. What inspired you to do that, and then what did that look like getting started?
So, my journey into advocacy, I did not expect to love it as much as I did. It started back when I was still diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I had a YouTube channel, totally different name, and I'd had it since 2015, and I did a kind of lifestyle content, but I wanted to do some mental health related stuff. And so I wanted to kind of have a side part of that channel that was called Bipolar Kit. Very original title just there, right? And so I was thinking about that, and I was already had that on my mind. And then I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. And I thought to myself, okay, this is a little bit more rare than bipolar disorder. This is something that I don't really see a lot of people advocating for, especially in the YouTube space. And I'm like, okay, I need to make a totally separate channel. And I was out with my dad one day. We were just hanging out, and I told him that I had the idea to start a different YouTube channel, and I wanted to name it Schizo Kitso because I have schizoaffective disorder and my name is Kit, so it's like a little pun. And he looked at me and he said, "That's really good. Write that down." And that was the name of my channel. And so my advocacy really started on YouTube. I started making YouTube videos, doing deep dives from like a scientific perspective while also talking about my lived experience. And I kind of grew there. And then I thought to myself, I need to venture out to other platforms. I want to explore short form video because short form video is where a lot of creators really shine. And exploring short form is actually how originally I saw you, Kody, and I saw your content. And I was like, oh, he's doing so great. I want to do stuff like that. And so I got up the nerve to actually post like my first short form video, and a little bit later things started kicking off, and I was like, this is definitely more, it became more of a primary strategy rather than an afterthought. And I learned to really love short form, and it was through that I was able to grow my Instagram, which helped me reach more people, and it helped me meet more people too. And so I was really excited that started working. And so through that, I was able to apply to the Healthy Voices conference, which I was so happy that I got in. And then I met all these wonderful people, including you, Kody. And it was like, yeah, this is where I belong. This is right for me. And so I show up all the time on social advocating for schizoaffective disorder, and I have a really fun time doing it. And I don't want my life to be any other way.
No, that's awesome. I love your story, and a big reason why I asked you to do this was not only because I think you're an amazing advocate. Your name being a pun just spoke to me in volumes. Being that my username is schizophrenic hippie, and people always thought that was so strange, and like, but it's it gets people's attention. I think yours does the same, and I think also a lot of people try to tell us how we need to talk about our illness or how we need to refer to ourselves, and I've never been a huge fan of that. So I loved that your username was original. It was attention grabbing, but then I actually deep dove into your content, and I'm like, wow, she is really unique. You have a really cool take, not only being a person with lived experience, but being, in STEM and understanding science a little more. Can you talk, because this is going to come up a lot in the podcast, can you talk more about that part of your life, that part of your background? And then I'll get into like my advocacy stuff, but I want people to understand that part of your story as well, because it's going to be relevant when we talk about more things on a deep dive level, which we are going to do a lot of.
Yes. I hope so. I hope so. So, back when I was younger, I originally wanted to become a plastic surgeon. When I was 7 years old, I saw a flyer for this organization called Operation Smile in the mail, and I wanted to fix kids who had cleft lips and cleft palates, and that was like my whole thing. So my whole life from then on out was geared towards medical school. So when I was in school, it was like extracurriculars, getting good grades, doing as much as I possibly could to be well-rounded, but also have the requirements. When I went off to college, it was more extracurriculars, more time, more effort. Basically, I tried to get my name on a paper at one point, and I did a lot of research in science labs. I worked in 2 labs. I worked in an industry lab where I sequenced DNA and RNA for 3 years, and then I had 2 years of actual research experience working in the research part of it. And so I fell in love with science then. And I remember my first biology class in college, Bio 101, I had this professor who she taught me how to read a scientific paper. And I did not realize that that would be one of the most important skills that I would ever learn in my entire life, but I remembered it. And so after college, when I had my psychotic break and my whole life was derailed, I figured out and came to the realization that medicine was not a field I was going to be able to go into in the way that I thought. Medical school was not a thing. I couldn't do it. I can't handle the stress. My cognitive issues from my disorder were too limiting. And so I was left wondering, what am I going to do with my life? And shortly before the pandemic started, I started looking for jobs. And I thought, well, I did lab tech positions in college. Maybe I can do that in the meantime while I figure things out. And I applied to every lab in my local hospital and was able to get into one of them. And I was really excited about that. And it was actually, my start date was March 16th, 2020. So right as...
Oh no. Oh.
Yeah, there was a hiring freeze and everything. Like, they snuck me in, and that was 5 years ago. And yeah, so basically, I have a science background because of that. So I work in a lab, and I read papers all the time for work, and I have access to PubMed through work, so I do a lot of reading. And when I started doing my YouTube channel, I realized I wanted to take a scientific perspective of things, because that was something I hadn't really seen. Was like, I see a lot of lived experience out there, and that's obviously, that's awesome, I love that, but there wasn't a lot of science, and I'm like, maybe that's a hole I can fill. And so when I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, that was when I started reading psychology papers and psychiatry papers and studies and history, and even the DSM-5. I have a copy of the DSM-5 like in my
So
possession.
do I do.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, yeah, it's like a required reading at this point. But yeah, so I have a scientific background. I work in a lab as a scientist, and I try to share that background as much as I can. And it's really my way of still staying part of science and STEM, even though I can't be a doctor. And that it makes me happy that I can share my knowledge with the world and take what is seemingly extremely complicated and make it simple and easy to understand for everybody.
That's huge, especially in this day and age. Understanding the science behind things, I think, are so important, and it's going to play a huge role in our conversations, because I've been doing advocacy for lived experience for quite a few years now, and I love what I do. And I can talk minimally about like some of the science background only because of years of working with advocates, working with doctors, working with psychiatrists. And I think this is where you're going to be able to really help have very productive and educational conversations on this show, where I can still tie in lived experience, but you can talk more about some of the statistics, some of the numbers, about the different topics we discuss. And so that I'm very excited for. I do. So I'll go back just a little bit. I'll tell you guys about how I got into advocacy. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about what conversations we'd love to have in the future of this podcast. We'd love your guys' input, anything you guys would like to hear from us. So for my story into advocacy, after I was diagnosed, I really felt very alone. Being in a small rural community, I didn't have anyone to reach out to. I didn't know who to talk to about what I was going through. The only person I knew on the the only person I had ever met on the schizophrenia spectrum was my mom. And because of the, cognitive damage from her not getting treatment early on, she wasn't a great person for me to be able to communicate with and be able to talk to. So I felt very lost. I didn't want to continue living with my diagnosis, and that was until I found peer support. So I found a NAMI group, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness, right here in my area. I went to my very first peer support group, and I remember thinking, like, I walked into that room and I was like, these people are crazy. I am nothing like these people. That was my genuine first thought, and I feel bad looking back, but the longer I sat in those rooms, the more I realized that that was the first time I had felt community in my entire time of my diagnosis. So I kept going back, and I ended up loving it. I ended up really creating a relationship with the people in that room, the people who understood me better than anyone else could because they had been there and they had lived it. I also saw something that I didn't know was possible. I saw people with schizophrenia living full and functional lives, which I did not know could be done, even with treatment and medication. So they really inspired me to find hope in my own journey. I shared my story after weeks of attending this peer support group. And as soon as I got done sharing my story, I had another patient come up and tell me how grateful they were and how much they identified with my past of addiction and incarceration, and they said they were going to come back the following week and share their story because I inspired them. And that was it for me. After that, advocacy became my only goal. It became my dream. And so a few years after that, 2018 is when TikTok was blowing up. So Kit was smart. She got started on YouTube. I started on TikTok. And so I loved it, though. I shared my first story about schizophrenia. I got so many amazing comments from people. I shared what I now call schizophrenic story time. I did my very first one, and I went to sleep with 300 followers, and I woke up to 10,000 overnight. So it blew up. And this became my full-time job. This became what I do, is educating people about schizophrenia. And with all that amazing love that I got, there was also a lot of, you know, misconceptions, misinformation about schizophrenia. So I found it really important to try to correct some of that in my own journey. And that actually is also how I got my username. So my username was actually my very first hate comment. So on the very first video I made about schizophrenia, someone said I look like a schizophrenic hippie because of my long hair and tattoos, I presume. I don't know. But I decided to take that and make it my username. And so to this day, that is still my username on all platforms. And that's how I got into advocacy, was really from peer support and from early TikTok days. And I what Kit had said this to you. I never really planned on advocacy being like what I did, and I think our audience is going to hear that a lot when we start bringing on guests and stuff. I don't think many people choose advocacy. I think advocacy becomes a part of your journey just because some people who go through illness are also very good communicators and storytellers. And I think that's Kit, what you do really well. I hope that's what I do well, and that's what we're really trying to do with this podcast. So I wanted to ask you, Kit, that now that we're kind of into it, everyone knows our background a little bit. What do you really want to see with this podcast? What are some topics you're really excited of? And then who are some guests that you would be so pumped to have on? I just want to get a feel, and I want the audience to kind of hear like what our long-term goals are with this.
So I'm really excited to have a conversation with another person about these mental health topics while also having room to basically nerd out, because I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of research, and it's not very often I get to just spit it all out and like say it all, because my YouTube videos are short. They're quite short, and I try to keep them concise. But there's something different about having a conversation, especially with a fellow advocate who gets it, that I think there's going to be a lot of fun there to be had. So I'm really excited about the future of the podcast for that sense. Like, this is just a fun opportunity. I'm so excited to explore it. People I would love to see. Oh man. So the dream guest is so one of the biggest things for me in my recovery was I took a bunch of classes in dialectical behavior therapy. I've actually been through the course 3 times. It's a 6-month course. And the creator of that course, her name is Marcia Linehan, and she is an absolute legend in the DBT community because she saved all our butts. And I would love to have a conversation with her one day. That's the dream. So
Okay, so anyone listening, if you have the hookup, let us know. We want to get her on. Kind of same thing you said. I'm very excited just about the conversations. I've been talking about a lot of the same talking points in my advocacy for years because it's the most common questions people ask. So I feel like I'm constantly answering the same questions, and I want to get into stuff that I haven't been able to talk about because you've had some like one-on-one conversations with me now. You know, there's a lot that I'm passionate about in the mental health space that I don't talk a lot about. And so I'm really hoping this podcast allows us to do that. I'm also excited to have an ongoing schizophrenia related podcast. I've done several podcasts in the past, some, single season podcasts, some long term podcasts that were more like, general topics. And so I'm really excited for this one so we can continue to grow a platform helping people better understand schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. I would love to also have, some more guests on with bipolar disorder to learn more about that. My dream guests are going to be a lot of like advocates who I haven't already worked with. So there's a ton we're going to have on that if you guys have followed me and listened to my other podcasts, you're going to know them because there's some people that, they just owe me a favor. They're coming on this podcast, whether they like it or not. Uh, I'm using those favors to get those people on here. But in all seriousness, there are a lot of people that I haven't worked with that I think would be amazing to have on. I think my dream guest, because it's someone I haven't been able to talk to, would be Ellen Sachs. She's a psychoanalyst. So she is the associate dean and a professor of law and psychology at the behavioral sciences at the University of Southern California. And she, like her work, she's done TED Talks, she's done really amazing work, and I would love to have her on. And I think you and her would have really cool because you're more of that science background. I just want to have her on because I'm an advocate nerd and I love meeting people with lived experience, and so I think it would be such a good conversation. But I'll also have on my usual guests, Gabe Howard, of course, Michelle Hammer, we're going to have on. And we also have both talked about bringing on some of the people in our lives. I'm planning on bringing on my wife and my mother. Kit, sounds like you're planning on bringing on your dad at some point, which I'm really pumped about. So
Yeah, my dad, he doesn't really have, he's never really talked on my YouTube channel. I haven't interviewed him. I mention and bring him up a lot in my content, but I actually don't have him in anything. And so when we were talking about starting this podcast, I went to him and I said, "Hey, Dad, just saying, you've been a big part of my life. Do you potentially want to be a guest on it?" And to my surprise, he actually agreed. So yes, my dad will be on.
that's awesome. I'm super pumped about that. And people who have followed me have heard my wife speak before. So Allison, my wife, has been with me since before my diagnosis. She was with me through the psychotic break, through my addiction, through my time in jail. So she's been, such a big part of my life. And then also, my mom has been on an episode of another podcast I did, but she has such interesting insight as a person, not only with schizoaffective disorder, but as a person who had to watch her son go through this exact same, issues with a diagnosis and addiction. So I'm so excited to be able to bring both of our family perspectives on as well. So you guys have no idea. We are one episode into this. We probably got a year's worth of content lined up. Like the most difficult part is figuring out where to start, honestly. But I think that's great because, like I said, I want this to be an ongoing project that if you're someone who struggles and you feel alone and you just need to listen and connect with someone, we want to be those people for you guys. So I'm really excited about this project. I'm very excited to learn more about Kit and her journey. I'm excited to bring on numerous guests. And we have just such an awesome lineup planned for you guys. But like I said, we want to know also what topics would you like to hear from us? What are things that you're interested in learning about? What are some things that Kit can nerd out about? Like
Give me all the topics. Give me all the topics. I'll take any excuse to go on PubMed.
any excuse to do extensive amounts of research.
Yeah. It's like I give myself homework.
Yeah, see, and that's where we're different. I'm not giving myself any homework. I can barely get through the homework I have. Writing a book, I realized that homework was not for me. The whole process was amazing, but it was like, oh, all the research and like the annotating everything, and oh my god, I don't know how you science people do it. I give you props.
It's painful.
Okay, so I thought that was just for me. I thought you guys enjoyed that process.
No, when I get together in the descriptions of my science videos and I have to list all the sources, I'm just like, oh, geez, I got to get in the right like citation and stuff because I actually care about the citation format. So, yeah, it's like every video, there's a bibliography in the description. Oh man.
Oh man. Yeah, and we'll be sure to, if we get into any more like scientific type stuff, I'll make sure that if Kit brings up any studies, we put them in descriptions of videos and in the podcast description, stuff like that. Because like I said, I want this to be for people with lived experience, but I also would love to have caregivers listening, psychiatrists, doctors, anyone who interacts with people with serious mental illness or schizophrenia. I want this to be a resource for them. So
Kody, you're saying all these awesome things about people sending in their ideas, their suggestions for guests, all of that. Where can they actually do that?
if you guys want to reach out, there's a couple different ways to do it. The best way to get us is going to be at our email. So we have a schizandgiggles email. It's exactly like it sounds. You can reach out to us there. That's going to probably be the easiest way. We also have an Instagram page, so feel free to message us on there. But being that Instagram does filter some messages, I don't want to miss anything. So if you don't hear from us on Instagram, definitely just send us an email. And we want to hear not only topics, but if you guys have a guest you'd love to hear, if you're someone with lived experience and you would want to be a guest at some point, let us know. We're going to consider everything and everyone. We want to make sure that we're giving a voice to people who haven't had an opportunity to share their story before. So let us know what you think. Let us know if you have any opinions, if you have any criticisms, anything you want to learn more about. We are here for it. We are ready and we are pumped.
Yes!
Yes!
So hyped! Hype train!
And then I think before we finish today, did we want to explain the name a little bit? Because I'm wondering if some people aren't going to get it. I also had someone ask me on one of the posts, which I thought was really funny, because I didn't think, I was like, Schiz and Giggles to me is clearly like, oh, schizophrenia spectrum and giggles because we're funny.
Yeah, that's where it came. Yeah.
But someone asked me, they're like, who's Schiz and who's Giggles? Like one of us is either. I'm like, well, I guess that would make both of us both. But if we had to choose, I feel like I'm Giggles, right?
I'm definitely Schiz. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So the name Schiz and Giggles actually comes from Kit's dad, who is her branding department, from what I understand.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when we bring him on, we'll let him talk more about the name. But we really wanted it to be clear that this is a podcast about schizophrenia, but also we're going to use humor. We're going to tie in lived experience. This is going to be from our perspective. And I think the easiest way to have some of these really difficult conversations is to allow space for humor, for comedy. And that's how I get through my diagnosis. I know Kit has really embraced that since she's met me. And even before that, you did a lot. Some of the videos of yours I really like that I'll talk about on a later date, use humor in your own way. So I love that. I think that really sums up our experience and what we're trying to do here. So I appreciate your dad for coming up with such a good name. And I appreciate all the listeners for jumping on and giving this a chance. Bear with us. This is a new project for both of us. We're really excited about it. It might get off the rails a little bit, but honestly, I think that's all part of the experience. And I'm really pumped for what this might become.
I'm really excited too. We have a lot of opportunity here to make something that people would find amazing, and I hope that we can do that in the future with this podcast. So, lots of fun things happening. And so thank you guys so much for joining us on the first episode and following along. Definitely do follow this podcast wherever you are listening to it, and do give it a rating if you feel like you want to rate it. We will not be opposed to that. But yeah, thanks for joining us, because the brain is a minefield and we brought flip-flops.
Thank you guys again for listening, and we will talk to you soon.